Now this is the reality. The reality is that you retire a debt of 6.8% with a debt of 10.3%, and then you clap and you want the whole country to be closed for people to celebrate. I'm provoking all of us here. I mean, Kenya is for all of us, and we need to speak these things as clearly as they ought. If there is one threat that we face as a country today, it is debt. And I don't think we are taking the seriousness of this matter the way it should. And I also don't think those who are responsible are communicating enough about the problem we have about debt. One of the ways you cannot get out of the hole is to continue digging that hole. When we inflate our denominator, we continue to show like the economy grew with the purpose of having a leg room of borrowing more. The problem is that you cannot teach figures for too long. It catches up with you, and especially when it is time for repayment. The room to exercise the authority of budget making process continues to be decimated. For me, in one way, it's a good thing, especially in regards to what this money goes into doing. But of course, as I wind up, I'll talk more about also the revenue side. Nachukua a few points here and there. I'm talking broadly, so please don't get lost in the mix. I'm just trying to be broad and general. This financial year, as you do the alternative budget, this and next, you will likely see a lot of enhancement in GJ law, because maybe 1 year after today, or even months after today, we are likely to see a lot of activities around IEBC. It is a huge budget expectation there, because we are talking about around 60 billion Kenya shillings that must go into the instruments of democracy, into making sure you have a credible election in the year of election, which is not very far from today. Now, why have I picked just IEBC? Even with the challenges that there are in terms of funding the current budget, the budget we are likely to give IEBC during the electioneering period is actually more than the entire budget we give to the road sector in Kenya when you talk about development funded by GOK. So I want you to start exercising your mind around your expectations then. I have talked about non-discretionaries you can't do anything about. There is now another non-discretionary called IEBC that will take approximately 60 billion. So what is that doing? It continues to shrink what you may call political development. As an MP, as a politician, you may talk about all the other things. Before you talk about roads and water, you have not yet said anything about development. Because the people's expectation in terms of Kenya is around those areas. Let me say something about debt. If there is one threat that we face as a country today, it is debt. And I don't think we are taking the seriousness of this matter the way it should. And I also don't think those who are responsible are communicating enough about the problem we have about debt. One of the ways you cannot get out of the hole is to continue digging that hole. You know, I just want you to reflect on the figures that were projected here. You tell me whether Kenya continues to get out of the hole or to dig the hole further. And I think in terms of debt management, we have a lot of work to do as a country. And the government also has a lot of work to do around debt management. If you track debt from year 2003, especially during President Kibaki's time, he took up the country when the debt was around 600 billion shillings. By the time he left, it was around 1.8 trillion. But I want you to see the other side of it. When President Kibaki came in, revenue collection in Kenya was 200 billion. Can you just imagine how small a country we were? We were collecting only 200 billion in ordinary revenue. When President Kibaki left, that figure was around or close to 1 trillion Kenya shillings. So if you look at the debt growth, the debt grew from 600 to 1.8 trillion. That's around maybe 200% over and above. But look at the revenue collection. The revenue collection, the growth was like double that of debt accumulation. And I want to say, because figures don't lie, you realize that the accolades given to President Mwai Kibaki, he actually deserves more. Because now we have comparisons to do. When it was just President Kibaki's reign, there was no comparative analysis to do. Now he left in 2013. We can now do comparative analysis from then, and clearly you can see Kenya has never had a more prudent president than President Mwai Kibaki. And it is the same time we had very revolutionary expenditure lines like basic education funding and all the others, that even beyond being good in terms of growth of the economy, they also are social investments, because they enhance an egalitarian society. All of us here in this hall, I can bet over 80% will not be in this hall were it not for the reforms around education during that time or regime of President Mwai Kibaki. Why am I talking about that in this kind of standness? We are now talking about 10 trillion to 11 trillion depending on where the currency is, because 50% is denominated by a currency, not other currencies, not ours. You don't need anyone to tell you the economy of Kenya grew by what percent. You can calculate it by yourself in nominal terms and in real terms, because you have all the parameters from public institutions. So the problem around our debt is that when we inflate our denominator, we continue to show like the economy grew with the purpose of having a leg room of borrowing more. The problem is that you cannot teach figures for too long. It catches up with you, and especially when it is time for repayment. Debt management is everything else. It catches you around repayment. Now, we are spending over 1 trillion Kenya shillings in paying our interest rates. Over 1 trillion Kenya shillings. Now, whether you inflate GDP or you condense it, that is actual money that actually have to be paid. That is where it catches you. Because you may come and say, our fiscal deficit to GDP ratio is 5% or the next, or the other figure. That's fine, it goes to the books. It will catch up with you when it's time for repayment. The other things I want you to, I'm just provoking your mind so that you go research further. I saw headlines in our newspapers the other day in jubilation that we have done a very good thing, because in that year of 20, I think last year or thereabout, we were able to repay our Eurobond. And the people in this hall, because I can see you are able to dig deeper. You talk about in jubilation of having been able to pay the Eurobond of 2014. And it comes out as headline as a jubilation for the country. Now this is the reality. The reality is that you retire a debt of 6.8% with a debt of 10.3%. And then you clap and you want the whole country to be closed for people to celebrate. I'm provoking all of us here. I mean, Kenya is for all of us, and we need to speak these things as clearly as they ought. You cannot go and take a loan from Shylock, you pay a bank, and then you go home, and people should celebrate you for taking a loan with an interest of 20% to pay the one you had that you are paying 12%. Those are the things that will catch up with this country very soon. And by the way, with all honesty, if we do not become more prudent in the several months to come, we are likely to have a very big problem with our debt. Why? If in our revenue collection, over 40% is going into interest rate alone of debt obligations, what are we talking about? The other thing I want us to reflect on around debt, and the reason why this, and I'm challenging even those who are responsible in government to speak about it clearly, because part of this communication is important. You collect revenues of around 2.4 trillion shillings. You use over 1.2 trillion in paying interest rates of debt incurred. So that's 50% that you can do nothing about. Basically what we are doing as a country, the money we are borrowing in terms of PFM Act, you should be borrowing for development alone. But even by doing the math even with a pencil, if we take our revenue collection, you remove CFS, you remove salaries, you're already in red. It means the money we borrow, some of it is for budget support, and clearly that money is for recurrent. You don't need to go very far. Just this data, just do the math around this data, even with a pencil, you'll get the correct figure. So this issue of debt, if we are not progressive enough and prudent enough as a country, in just a few months to come, we will see the ramifications. We do not want Kenya to be a case study like Sri Lanka in the year 2002, in the year 2022, 2023. The primary reason was debt. The issue around Zambia never descended too much because there was a new president who had to tell their country as it is, and they restructured, or they started or attempted to restructure. Ghana never had that luxury. They actually defaulted. Now, if you receive 2 shillings, and 1 shilling is already going into interest rates of debt incurred in terms of interest rate, and the other shilling remaining cannot pay even the recurrent expenditure, I mean, there is work to be done there. And I'm saying it so that we provoke our mind, we think, not with the aim of just talking, but also providing a solution to it. Therefore, you must have seen sometime last week, last week, I saw the National Treasury had put up some communication which was recanted very fast about a visit to China. Visits to China currently or other bilaterals, I can assure you, will be about debt primarily. Because we are almost at a cliff in terms of debt repayment, and especially interest rate. The problem is that when you go to your creditors to discuss about either rescheduling debt or working around new terms, what are you telling the markets? When I am here, I have borrowed 3 of you some money, 10,000, 12,000, 18,000. I have your money now, so you expect me to pay you. You see, as my sister there, I've already called my brother here to tell him, you know, I was to pay you this money, but forgive me, you may have to add me a few more months for me to pay you this money. What am I already telling you? As the other person, I owe money. I've already called you as a person who owes you money. I mean, najaribu kuondoa economy kwa hii maneno mingi. Martin is here. Dirango is there. And Veronica. All of you have lent me money. Veronica 12,000, Dirango 10, and Martin 18,000. Yani, mmenikopesha. Mnaelewa hiyo maneno? Niko hapa. Martin ako hapa, ameona nimeita Dirango. Nimemwambia, najua niko na pesa yako na nilikuwa nikulipe next month. Lakini sasa nataka tuongee. What comes to your mind as Veronica? Are you getting what I'm trying to say? Any talk you start around debt, changing terms, you already communicate to the markets. If you look at the figures, the yield of our Kenyan Eurobond, even as late as yesterday, you see changes there. Because markets operate on credible and fundamental information. When the market starts sensing that somebody owes you money, you're already talking to them, not asking them which bank account they should pay you through, but asking you, can we, tunaweza fanya unipe miezi kidogo, kiasi nini. When they start seeing you already giving signals to one of your creditors that you want changes in terms, you are already communicating signals to the market. And those signals in the market is actually how countries then decide. Because what usually happens, when you give signals that you have problems to pay debt, the international market starts to sense you as somebody who may also change terms when they lend you money. So what do? They already input that risk in the interest rate they will charge you. That is why you see the yield of our Kenyan Eurobond is changing. Because when the creditors start seeing, you may start some stories sometime later in the future, they also price you accordingly. So they lend you money fine, but you also pay a commensurate cost for it. Now the other thing I want you to look at is this. You can talk to China and they agree. China, you know, people imagine China is the #1 lender to Kenya. No, that's not true. The Kenyan debt to Kenya, the Chinese debt to Kenya is actually less than 10%. It's only that Chinese debt is usually project finance, which is more expensive, and commercial. So they become more expensive. But there are some other parameters I provoke you to go and check. Out of our CFS, payments of interest rate of 1 trillion, approximately. 750 billion this current financial year. It is now over 800 billion. The one we budgeted was 750. I think it's now hovering around 800 billion by close of the year. But let me use 750. Please get this point. 1 trillion shillings is for payment of interest rate. 750 billion is for domestic debt servicing. So, external debt, we are talking about around 200 billion shillings.